Welcome to another episode of the .NET Show. Now, one of the things I use for figuring out what to focus on each one of these episodes is comments from you, the users. One of the most common episodes you've asked for is on VB.NET. Now, since Beta 1 I know had a lot of changes between Beta 1 and Beta 2, I wanted to hold off doing a VB.NET episode until I knew that the VB.NET product that was out there in the beta was close enough to what would be finally available, so this show would have that much more relevance. Well, finally, since Beta 2 is out there, you guys now have a chance to play around with VB.NET the way it'll be in the final release when it comes out. So in this episode, we're going to talk about VB.NET, how to write applications using VB.NET, and most importantly, what it means to take an application that exists in VB6 and upgrade it to use VB.NET and why that's important. But before we get to that, let's check in with Erica and the news.
Hello, I'm Erica Wiechers. Welcome to the MSDN News Update. In June, Microsoft released Beta 2 of its latest development tool, Visual Studio.NET. The newest version of Visual Studio provides a complete development environment for building XML web services and applications on the Microsoft .NET Framework, Microsoft's next-generation web application development platform. You can order Visual Studio.NET on CD or DVD, or you can receive it automatically when you subscribe to MSDN Universal. Also in June, Microsoft released Donkey.NET, a three-dimensional driving simulator game that demonstrates the new features available to Microsoft Visual Basic developers. Written in Visual Basic.NET Beta 2, this sample uses XML web services, multi-threading, structured exception handling, shaped Windows forms, and custom-drawn controls. The sample can be downloaded from the MSDN Code Center. In August, Microsoft will begin a .NET Developer Training Tour in 26 cities in the U.S. This intense two-day developer course includes 16 modules covering all areas of .NET development. Attendees will learn how to build a new intranet application accessing existing XML web services on the Internet. This year, Microsoft will host its Professional Developers Conference October 22nd through the 26th in Los Angeles, California. The PDC is a deeply technical developer event where Microsoft provides developers with an inside view of Microsoft's all-new tools, technologies, and breakthroughs in XML web services technologies. This includes the .NET Framework, technology codenamed Hailstorm, and device and enterprise application integration. At this PDC, developers will have the opportunity to experience everything they need to build a new generation of integrated solutions and software services that deliver new user experiences. Be sure to check out the show transcript for links to more information on these news items. And that's been the MSDN News Update. I'm Erica Wiechers.
Welcome back. Today, like I said, we're going to be talking about VB.NET, what that means to programmers trying to develop applications to the new .NET environment, as well as past VB programmers, what it means to take and move over and start using VB.NET for their application development. And here to help me talk about those things, we have Rob Copeland, Product Unit Manager for VB.NET, and Ed Robinson, a Program Manager for VB.NET. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah.
So, probably, I suppose we should start out from the beginning. Where does Microsoft have a history in VB? I mean, where did it come from? How did VB get started?
Well, VB got started back in the days of Windows, and
We're still in the days of Windows.
That's a good point. I meant the days where Windows was getting started, and developers were mostly writing applications in C++ in the early days of Windows. And Microsoft wanted to have an easy way to put together Windows applications, and the BASIC language has been a part of Microsoft's product offerings for a long, long time. And this was a perfect opportunity to take that BASIC language and marry it with a very easy visual way to create Windows applications.
Because Bill Gates wrote the original BASIC compiler for Microsoft.
Right, and then BASIC shipped with MS-DOS since the beginning. GW BASIC and then Q BASIC after that, and then we did have a DOS-based product, two DOS-based products actually, Quick BASIC and the Professional Development System version of BASIC, which was a higher-end version.
So then Visual Basic is just continuing that and making more of the Windows version for BASIC.
Exactly. We wanted to make a very productive environment for quickly putting together Windows applications. And so the team that was working on that product, which was codenamed Thunder, really looked at how they could make an environment that made putting visual applications, GUI-based applications, together very quickly and remove a lot of the complexity that was there when you were writing applications with C or C++.
Back in those days, even the standard graphical development environments weren't very well thought out. I mean, we had, I think we had Quick C back then, or Quick C for Windows. I'm not sure whether we didn't have Visual Studio at all back then.
No, we didn't.
So we were all just, writing text and then compiling text and no WYSIWYG draw form sorts of things.
Exactly. Everything was still character-based. Even the C development environment for Windows was still character-based up at that point. So this was really a big shift in the way that developers would create programs. One of the biggest things was the ability to have this canvas or this form that allowed people to drag controls and visually place them where they wanted on the form, and then write code to handle the events that happened on those controls. So for example, if you put a button on a form, obviously, as most Visual Basic developers know, it has a click event so when someone clicks it. But this was a big step forward. Before that environment, it was quite a bit of code to handle the messages that Windows would send and figure out it was the click message and then post messages back to Windows and so forth. It took a lot.
It just built character, though.
Yes, it did build character, but it also took a long time to get done.
I think the key thing was that Visual Basic really took care of the plumbing for you, so you could concentrate on writing your business objects and writing your application.
So then, over the years, when Visual Basic was kind of evolving and coming to different levels, what are some of the major milestones you think that came out?
Well, this will be the 7th version. Visual Basic.net will be the 7th version of the Visual Basic product family on the Windows platform. And some of the major milestones, VB3 was a major milestone for us. And a few of the reasons are we added really deeply integrated data access. So it was very easy for developers to get to corporate data and create desktop applications for that corporate data. And it was also really when we saw the explosion of third-party controls, which really allowed developers to add capabilities to their applications by simply buying a component and dropping it onto their form. They didn't have to, as Ed was just saying, know about the complexities of the implementation details of many technologies like MAPI in order to do email, or the actual database components abstracted away a lot of that low-level architecture and implementation to get to the data and so forth. So there was a lot of third-party involvement.
And now there's an entire industry out there just dealing with controls and stuff like that.
Yes.
And that evolved into what we now call ActiveX controls in the browser and stuff like that.
Yes. Yeah, the next major version after Visual Basic 3 was Visual Basic 4, and that was when we were calling them Olay controls at the time. They became ActiveX controls a little bit later, but we also introduced the 32-bit version of Visual Basic that was built on COM. And this was a huge step forward, not only because of the 32-bit version, but also because we added the concept of class modules and really reusable components across a wide variety of products. So no longer the controls in previous versions of Visual Basic really only worked in Visual Basic. And starting with VB4, we had components that could be used from Visual Basic or from Office or from C++, and that even caused that explosion of components to get even larger.
And that was the first version that we enabled you to write DLLs as well with Visual Basic. So
right.
that was a great boon for VB.
So part of that you couldn't even write a DLL, it was just an exe by itself.
Correct.
That's right.
Now part of that, could you access a DLL from VB so you could write a DLL in C? Or was it only the executable that you could be using in VB back then?
You could access C-based DLLs, entry point DLLs, in VB3 and before. But as we just said, in Visual Basic 4, these components were COM-based and not only allowing all these other products that I talked about to access them, but they accessed them in the same way and in an easier way. It was very object-oriented instead of just calling a function that you would do before. This was an object that had properties, methods, and events, and it made it easier to program against.
Mm-hmm. And so what was beyond that then? We're VB6 now?
Yes, the current version is Visual Basic 6. The version between those two, VB5, was another big step for us because we had a native code compilation. This was something that Visual Basic customers have been asking for a number of years, and we brought that to market as well as the ability to create ActiveX controls. And this was also a big thing because now you could create reusable user interface bits yourself in Visual Basic and then share them across all the wide variety of products that hosted ActiveX. Mm-hmm. And then we moved on to Visual Basic 6, and the major things that we added there were a much richer and deeper database feature set, so that you had more events to handle and deeper control over how data went back and forth between the client and the server, and how it went back and forth between middle-tier business objects. And we also introduced some new features to make internet programming easy from Visual Basic.
Like what? What are some of the internet features?
We added a feature called Web Classes that allowed you to put Visual Basic logic on a web server and call it and send back web pages. And we added a feature called the Dynamic HTML Designer that allowed you to put Visual Basic code behind client pieces, HTML pages.
And so that brings us now to VB.NET or VB7. And it sounds like we're just constantly evolving from one version to the next. I'm trying to add features, make it more richer, to solve problems that the industry might be having within their businesses or their standalone applications trying to develop. So how does VB.NET carry on that evolutionary process?
In my mind, Visual Basic.NET is a lot like VB1 in that Visual Basic 1 sort of opened the door for Windows programming to the millions, and Visual Basic.NET does the same thing. It opens the door to internet programming for the masses as well. And we've got a great design experience for creating web applications. And the old Visual Basic Forms Designer, we have something very similar for the web. So you can design web forms just in a very similar way to the way that you create Windows forms. That's the biggest thing for me.
So now we've talked in some of the past episodes about WinForms and web forms. So a web form is basically a web page design process.
Yes.
And like front page might be seen today or something like that. Whereas with VB.NET then, you can actually be using VB to develop a web-based form.
Yes. I think one of the biggest things that we've got going for us right now in Visual Basic.NET, or the biggest change, is we've got a new programming model. And it is this web-based programming model that's all about distributed applications that interact and are tightly communicating with each other. And the whole design experience is based around those types of applications. So the web forms is a good example where you can create a user interface that's HTML-based, where the code that runs when you click on buttons and do various actions in the browser runs back on the server and can interact with the other resources that are on the server and call web services and send new pages or new bits of information down to the browser.
That sounds a lot different than the standard Windows-based sort of thing, but it's very similar in the internet base when you're actually writing applications that are popping up to the client. But now you're incorporating the visual WYSIWYG interfaces that VB.NET has in it.
Exactly. It's a very familiar way to develop programs for Visual Basic developers, but it lets you create these new types of distributed applications, but it's very, very familiar.
What are some of the differences that VB.NET brings?
Visual Basic.NET, as I said, has this new programming model, so it has a number of new features, but I guess first and foremost, it's built on top of the .NET platform. The .NET framework is what we've been referring to, our common language runtime, and then the frameworks and API set that sits on top of that. And that's it's really a new way for Visual Basic to interact with the Microsoft platform. In the past, Visual Basic had our own runtime that sat on top of Windows and abstracted away some of the complexity that Ed was just talking about. And now what we've done is worked very closely with the Common Language Runtime and Frameworks team to build Visual Basic directly on top of this new platform from Microsoft so that we get very close relationships and the ability to directly call or use any part of that framework.
So then VB now is interacting with the underlying operating system in the exact same way that a C# application is, that a C++ application is. They're all gathering around that same runtime component, the common language runtime,
Exactly.
in order to function. So that makes VB even more of a first-class citizen than it was in the past.
Exactly, and that's the phrase that we've been using a lot when we talk to Visual Basic developers. It's a first-class language on the platform, which really means a lot. In the past, when Windows or some other part of Microsoft would come out with new features, many times the Visual Basic developer would have to wait for us to come out with a new version of Visual Basic before they could use those features because there wasn't that one-to-one mapping. Now, not only are all of the features in the new platform available directly to Visual Basic, but if new features are added as we move forward, those will be directly available as well without us having to revise Visual Basic.
In my mind, it's all about integration and connectivity. We're tightly integrated with the platform. We're integrated with the other languages as well. And also we've got this great connectivity. So we use XML as a transport mechanism. So using XML, we can connect to to other languages, to other components, to other platforms as well. And it's an industry standard way of passing information backwards and forwards between components.
Mm-hmm. Now, talking about all these evolutionary bits coming into VB.NET, what sort of changes are programmers going to be concerned about? I mean, if they've got an existing Visual Basic application they've been developing for years and years and years in their company, are they going to have to rewrite it for VB.NET?
Well, first let me address the first part of that, which was what changes are the Visual Basic developers going to see. And there are a number of changes just because we're on this new platform. So, for example, that rich set of frameworks that I was talking about provides a common forms package, and a common set of web services, and a common set of data access services, a common set of controls. And when I say common, these are common across the entire .NET framework. So C#, Visual Basic, and other languages on the framework can use them in the exact same way. Now, we've, again, worked very closely with those teams so that the forms package, for example, is very familiar to a Visual Basic developer that's got many of the same features with the same named events, and properties are named very similarly, so it's actually pretty easy to sit down and start making progress right away. But it is a different forms package, so there's new capabilities and there are some changes to it. And the same holds true with the controls and so forth, but by and large they're very familiar. The other thing is that we've made some changes to the Visual Basic language, and those changes are around 3 areas. We've made some changes to simplify the language to make it more easy to understand. We've made some changes to make it more robust, and so that you are less likely to write error-prone code. And then we've also made a set of changes to make it a more powerful language, so that not only can it be a first-class player on the platform, but also so that Visual Basic developers can write more powerful applications.
But it still feels like VB as well.
Exactly.
It still is definitely VB.
Yeah. Visual Basic developers, when they sit down and start using Visual Basic.NET, will feel that it's VB. The language looks, I mean, you dim X as integer just as you've always dimmed X as integer and dim it as a string, or the language looks just like Visual Basic. It's that we've just cleaned it up a little bit and made some changes to enhance it.
Now, are these changes you made, are they based upon user feedback or system integration capabilities, or what sort of things brought along some of these changes?
Both of those things, and also our design team sitting down and taking a look at the language and things that have caused users problems the most in the past. So we do have a lot of feedback from users. Over the past couple of versions of Visual Basic, we've had the ability for users to send us information about their projects, and we've gotten, I don't know, 26,000, 30,000 projects from users that we've been able to take a look at how they're using the product, what parts of the language do they use and how do they use it. That information helped us. We also talked to customers quite a lot at trade shows and conferences, and through VB Wish, which is an alias that people can send requests to, and so forth, and got feedback that way.
Okay, when you mention an alias people send requests to, VB Wish, it'll be vbwish@microsoft.com.
Yes.
So anybody that's got any sort of comments or wish list sort of items, they can send mail to that.
Yes.
Okay, you heard it here first.
And what do you think? What do you think the most common request is for from that? As far as I'm concerned, it's inheritance. People have always wanted inheritance.
Yes, we've heard that time and time again.
So do they have inheritance now?
They have inheritance now.
Mm-hmm.
A full set of object-oriented features have been added to the language. So those fall into that category that I was terming powerful, the ability to do more powerful applications. So inheritance and structured exception handling, where we've got try, catch, finally, and try, which lets you really structure your functions in a much more clean way than on-error did. Although we still support on-error, so code that uses on-error will continue to work, but try-catch we feel is a more structured and easier to read way to do error handling, and I think Ed's going to show a little bit about that during his demo. So
then what about existing projects then? How do you take, and what are some of the problems you might run into? Let's say you had a project at your company that you'd been working on, a big project that was doing parts ordering or something like that, and now you want to use VB.NET. What are the issues you could kind of be concerned about? Can you move that application across, or do you need to take and make sure you still got a good stash of VB.6 box so you install them around?
The choice is yours. We've got a great upgrade tool that we've built into Visual Basic.NET, but at the same time, if you don't want to bring your applications into VB.NET, Visual Basic 6 isn't going away anytime soon. So you can leave them in VB6, or you can upgrade part of your application to Visual Basic.NET, or you can upgrade the entire application to Visual Basic.NET. And what we're looking at with the upgrade tool is about a 95% upgrade, which really means you've got sort of 5% manual modifications that you've got to do afterwards. And we're spending a lot of time at the moment working out what those 5% of modifications are and what's the easiest way that people can do to make them. So as you'll see when we demonstrate the upgrade tool, we spit into your code for you different warnings and errors to alert you to problems in the code. And we summarize these in an upgrade report as well. And all of these problems are linked to online help. So you can find out what to do, make the changes, get your application running, and then start adding some of the great new features of VB.NET.
So you're actually turning your application into a fully formed VB.NET application, and then you can just dive in and start writing using VB.NET
Yes.
and make modifications to it.
I think the Ed's first point is key here. By default, users don't have to upgrade to Visual Basic.NET. If they're in the middle of a very large application and they're nearing completion, it might be better, depending on what they want to do with that application, to finish it in Visual Basic 6 and deploy it, and then see about how they want to start integrating and weaving in web services and XML support and so forth, and using Visual Basic.NET to do that. On the other hand, if they're ready to make that move now to XML web services, we've got the tools in the product to help make that transition quite easy.
Now, have you been dealing with users during these beta cycles and finding out exactly where they run into problems upgrading their application, migrating their applications over to the new system?
Oh, definitely. The list of the 5% that Ed was talking about, a lot of that is driven by user feedback that we see on the news groups and that we get from talking to customers directly, and our own experiences. We've got many Visual Basic 6 applications here at Microsoft that we run through and take a look at what causes problems, and we change the tool as needed and as we can, but some of the things are just not going to be very easy for the tool to do itself, and so we'll have links to help and so forth.
So basically, for the tool to do a decent upgrade, it's got to have a one-to-one correlation between a VB6 object or code element and a Visual Basic.NET code element. And we've identified a class of things that don't upgrade very well, and connected to that, we've identified some actions that you can do, some things that you can do to your Visual Basic 6 app to make it easier to upgrade to Visual Basic.NET. And we've produced a white paper with those recommendations in it. So that's available on the web on msdn.microsoft.com. So probably one of the biggest things is late binding. If you're using a lot of late binding in your VB6 application, what the upgrade tool does is it looks at your objects and it resolves default properties of your objects. It also changes any methods. If the methods have changed in Visual Basic.NET, it'll change the methods for you and the different parameters as well. But if an object is late bound, then it can't identify what the object is. So it just marks it with an error instead. So probably if you're going to do one thing to your VB6 applications, is try to strongly type your objects. And for more on that, I think we'll publish the link in this session of where to look for that information.
Yeah, so any links you have with useful documentation information, I'll make sure that I get from you guys and put it at the very bottom of the transcript window.
Great.
So all the users have to do is click on the Show Transcript button below the viewer. They see the transcript, go to the bottom, there'll be a whole bunch of links to further information.
Yeah, that'll be great.
Yeah. So that's probably the most important thing, late binding. To look a little bit deeper, I definitely recommend using ADO in your VB6 applications, because we can upgrade ADO to Visual Basic.NET, but DAO and RDO data binding, that they can't be upgraded to Visual Basic.NET. Probably another thing is to avoid or make sure that you're using the right data type for the right variable type for the right data. So don't use doubles for storing dates, and store strings and string variables. And that's because Visual Basic.NET is much stricter with its type checking than VB6, which is actually a really good thing, because it means you have less errors at runtime, because VB.NET sort of picks up the problems with coercions. But definitely use the right data type for the right data.
And that's one of the whole notion behind the whole common language runtime and all the .NET languages, is trying to make sure that the languages themselves enforce that robustness by having strong typing, so that you're not making those common mistakes that people have of casting from one thing to another and eventually totally forgetting what the thing was to begin with and passing it off as a pointer when it wasn't never a pointer.
One of the really cool things on that sort of level there is in Visual Basic.NET we have these strongly typed data sets, which is a way of manipulating data. It's kind of similar to record sets in VB6, but because they're strongly typed, if you use the wrong column name, the wrong field name, the compiler will pick that up at design time and warn you about it. So you're seeing a lot more errors being picked up at design time rather than at runtime.
Well, that's good. That's good. So what are some other key things you think that an existing Visual Basic programmer might need to be looking at carefully when they're looking at VB.NET?
Well, I think one of the things, and I mentioned this on last month's show, is that there's a lot of new capabilities, a lot of new features, and one of the things that developers should know when they start using Visual Basic.NET is there's going to be some things to learn. So they shouldn't expect to be able to just jump right in immediately and know everything about the product. And this is much more so than in past versions of Visual Basic, where we've had a set of features that we've added, but it's been fairly small. We've got a large set of new capabilities, and it's very, very exciting and very powerful. And we've added a lot of features to the development environment to make those things easy to find out about. But people should pace themselves and sit down and read the documentation and take a look at what we've provided to make it easy to get into the new product so that you can understand how to create applications, what architecture you should use, what objects you should use, and so forth.
Now, in stepping through all that, I mean, let's say I'm needing to face with Jenny to sit down and look at VB.NET and understand this better. Why don't I just move to some other language? Let's say other people might be building or running with C# or C++. Why not just take that time to get out of VB and get into C#?
We've designed Visual Basic.NET to be the obvious choice for Visual Basic developers. It's the same language, it's very familiar. The way that you develop applications, the drag and drop and the double click and writing code behind is the same. So really, Visual Basic.NET is the ideal .NET language for Visual Basic developers. There may be some developers that have always wanted to dabble in C or that style of a syntax, and C# is a good product for them to take a look at if that's what they want to do. But I think by and large, almost the majority of our developers will be very, very happy in Visual Basic.NET.
Can I just jump in here and say that on the Visual Basic team, we're all VB developers. So every one of us in Building 41 is a VB developer. So we're probably our own harshest critic. And we're probably also our own sort of greatest users of the tool. And we're the first ones to be picking up new things to do and making it better and better and better.
I guess to me it sounds like one of the big benefits of going to the new VB.NET is that since it does really elevate VB into being a full first-class citizen, you can actually balance against C# and saying anything you can do in C# you can now do in VB, so you don't have to take and pass anything up just because you're doing this simplified forms drawing sort of environment like VB started out in. Doesn't mean you can't actually do the full robust programming model that C++ uses.
That's largely true. There are some differences in Visual Basic and C#, but mostly by and large they're very similar in their functionalities. Their design points were a little bit different. C# was designed for the C and C++ developer, so it's designed for a more powerful kind of developer that's used to getting right down to the metal, whereas Visual Basic is designed for the Visual Basic developer, which are still powerful developers that write powerful applications, but it's designed to be a more productive environment. The language is designed to be easier to understand, easier to code in.
And then sometimes when the C++ programmers get down to the metal, they just get themselves into trouble really fast, and
Exactly.
then no one can fix their code and stuff like that, where VB is a much easier language to program in and understand and come into someone else's application and figure out what they were doing. Cause
It's a very quick language to develop in as well. You can develop, get prototypes up and running really quickly in Visual Basic.NET. Because VB.NET's got late binding, it's got automatic coercion between types, it's case insensitive as well, and all of this means you can write code really quickly and get things up and running really fast.
Mm-hmm. And one of the questions that people send me all the time quite a bit is, I'm spending a lot of time talking about the .NET systems and the internet and network connectivity and stuff like that. And they kind of say, well, what if I'm not writing an internet-based application? What if I'm not needing it on the internet? Is there anything that your application, your language can do that can just help me write a standard Windows application better using .NET? So maybe you can address that. Does VB.NET, is it so much on this .NET bandwagon that you doesn't really do anything better for a standard Windows application, or can you actually write full-fledged, standard, standalone, disconnected Windows apps better with VB.NET?
Full-fledged, standalone, disconnected Windows apps much better in Visual Basic.NET. I talked a little bit about the common forms package that's included as part of the .NET framework. And the forms package is very familiar, as I said, to Visual Basic developers, but it adds a whole host of capabilities that our developers have been asking us for years. And Ed's going to show some of these things, but easily creating forms that size correctly, so you don't have to write a bunch of code to size things. I
remember that problem.
Oh yes, I've written that code many times, and for some reason it always has a problem. I always end up debugging it, and so now it's just built in. And we've added a number of other features, such as the ability to have opaque forms and so forth. But I think the most important thing, and this is mostly a feature of the .NET framework and the Common Language Runtime, is the end to what we've been calling DLL hell. You can write a Windows-based application and put all of the files for your application into a single directory and run it. And there's no registration, there's no dependency on any of the other DLLs or components on your computer. And if you want to delete that application, you can just remove the directory and it is gone. And it doesn't affect any other application on the system. And this has been a problem for developers of ours for years. And I think that's probably the #1 feature that we have in this version. Probably the #2 is that we've got security. Now you said if I was writing an app that didn't have anything to do with the internet, but I think that by and large the majority of even client apps at some point are going to want to interconnect with other computers or other users, whether inside the company or outside the company. And so security is an integral part of the runtime and the forms package, which means that you can create components and controls and even applications that come down from the internet and cannot do anything malicious to your machine.
That's important. I mean,
Yes.
especially now with all the viruses floating around, those weirdos.
Yes.
Well, I love all
Yes.
the cool stuff in Windows Forms as well. Like I love the visual inheritance is really neat, where you can create. Say if you're a company, and you want to have a certain size form that's got your banner at the top with maybe a close button in the top right-hand corner. Well, you can make a base form and then inherit all your other forms from that form, and they take that base form as their. They just inherit all the controls from it, and it looks exactly the same. So things like that are really cool. There's a lot of really neat eye candy in Windows Forms.
That sounds like fun.
Oh, we've got a much better menu editor. That's another thing that customers have been asking us for years is please make the menu editor better. And it is much better. It's all WYSIWYG and not modal, and it's a much nicer experience. And overall, the controls, I think, are more capable. Many of the controls have features that we didn't have before. Buttons can now be flat or 3D or different colors, and we can do many, many different things.
There's a much richer design experience for programming all parts of Windows. So we have a complete library for a complete object library for programming the registry. We've also got things so you can get file change notifications in your application as well. It's a really, really rich environment.
So it sounds like just the full package of VB.NET is just tons better because the evolutionary process from VB1 all the way up has just kept on going.
Yes,
And so there's no reason why anybody should take and stall getting onto VB.NET.
I agree, yes.
So any final closing words you want to take and depart to our audience?
I think just that I'd love everybody, you can download Beta 2 of Visual Basic or Visual Studio.NET that includes Visual Basic. You can order it. For a small fee, we'll send a CD or a DVD out. And I would encourage everybody to download it, order it, install it, use it, send us your feedback on the news groups. I think everyone's going to have a great experience with it.
Well, thanks.
Thank
Ed.
Thanks, Robert.
Thanks, Rob. So hopefully that gave you some insights of what VB.NET is and how it can take and assist you in developing great applications for your corporation or for your own individual purposes. Now, following the short break, we're going to come back and talk with Ed, and he can actually show us what it means to migrate an application from VB6 to VB.NET. So join us then.
G'day! Today we're going on a really special hunt. We're going to study, track down, .NET, tag and release the great Homo erectus developer Geekus Maximus, better known as your basic software developer. Come on, let's have a look at it. Now, the habitat of the Geekus can't be seen in nature, but rather in man-made combination of dark dormitory room, dingy electronic wastelands, and bat caves. Ooh. Crikey's, this is a beauty, and an extremely rare case, I might add, of the Maximus. Look all that stuff lying around in there. Empty food containers, cans of Mountain Dew, the foundation of the developer's diet. Oh my gosh, look at that! I'm starting to smell the telltale odor of the Geekus Maximus. They have an extremely low tolerance for any kind of human communication. As a matter of fact, they're known to be some of the grumpiest members of the software family. Check out the Star Wars t-shirt, and look at that bed here. He hasn't slept for weeks. Look at that. Right there's the sandals and the holy jeans. A dead giveaway. We've got ourselves a full-blooded sample. Now earlier, I mentioned this wasn't only a look at the Geekus Maximus, but a catch and release mission. And to do that, we have to distract him, then net him, and tag him. Now, generally, these are nocturnal creatures, and tonight is no different. Look at him working so hard there. Now, all I have to do is distract him with this new keyboard. Watch. Check it out. He's going for it. Bang! We are in luck. We got ourselves a Microsoft Distinguished Engineer. Look at that wallet. It's thicker than you can even think about. This bloke's been around for some time. You can tell by his bloodshot eyes. And he's not happy either. I'm keeping him away from this monitor. Now all we have to do is get the tagger on him, set him, and we'll be on our way. Before I let him go, I have to check him for a couple of nasty parasites that can attach itself to the developer. Oh, bloody hell, he's got one. This blue one here is called a J2EE, and if it's allowed to multiply, it can totally inhibit the developer from producing scalable code. Get rid of it. Usually, a single exposure to XML web services and .NET will clean the infestation. Now we've got a radio transmitter set to see where the big fella goes. Heading in there. He's inside. We've been here for 2 hours now and he hasn't made his move yet. Wait a second, I think he's starting to show some signs of interest. Yeah. He's seen her, he's spotted her, his hands are trembling. He's ready to make his move. I think he's gonna do it. There he goes. He's over there. He's making contact with her. Oh, check that out. Isn't she a beauty? And he's a beauty too. Look at work. That's a good sign. Just what I was afraid of. She's got a portable device. In the area of love, it doesn't take much to distract the Wiechers. Bloody, she's got her own laptop. It looks like she's using Visual Studio.net. Look behind her ear. Oh, that's a beauty. True love for sure. Join me next week when I go hunting for even more elusive prey. The loud-speaking, pinstripe-suited, salesless abnormalis promiser. Good day.
Welcome back. We're continuing our investigation of VB.NET. Now, in the previous segment, we talked about some of the difference between VB6 and VB.NET and how there are sometimes some issues that a programmer might need to consider while they're developing an application that might eventually need to upgrade to VB.NET. Here to show us exactly what it means to upgrade an application from VB6 to VB.NET, again I have with me Ed Robinson and Rob Copeland. Thanks for joining us again.
Thanks, Rob. Glad to be here.
So, let's imagine that I've got an application that I've developed for my company that's using VB6, and it's a big, robust application we're using for a long time. And now a new version of VB comes out. I mean, I suppose any new version of any new programming environment comes out, I'm going to have to do some sort of upgrade to it. But VB.NET sounds like it's a lot more of an upgrade than just VB5 to VB6 was. So, what do I need to do to get my application running?
So the key things to know, you're absolutely right. It's not an automatic upgrade. It does take a little bit of effort to bring your applications into Visual Basic.NET, and you need to learn how to do it. But then after you've done it, you can start adding value with some of the great new features of Visual Basic.NET. So what I'd like to do now, instead of just talking about it, why don't I show you how to upgrade an application? So on the screen here, I'm going to start Visual Basic 6, and I've got this little application that I've been working on. Rob, I'm doing something in my spare time. I'm starting up my own video store, and we're going to be specializing in VB videos.
I'm glad you have the time to do that.
So let's suppose you've just walked into my store and you want to rent a video. So the first thing I do is I'd swipe your video card or search for you, and I'd find Rob Copeland. And then we'd select the videos that Rob wants to buy, so he wants to rent. So we've got Visual Basic.NET, what's new version 1 and what's new version 2. So Rob, after this we'd check you out. So that's going to cost you $8 for those 2 videos. So do you want to pay cash or pay with a credit card?
I don't have any cash, so let's go credit card.
Okay, let's see how good you are. Uh-oh. So one of the problems with my application is that I haven't finished it yet, so this causes an error when I try to pay with a credit card. Anyway, we'll fix that up later on. Let's have a look at some of the technologies of this application. This is a 2-tier application, so the client has got a bunch of forms in it, and these forms simply collect information from the user and accept input from the user. But most of the grunt work is done in this middle tier, and the middle tier has a business object that uses ADO to pull information from a database and return information to a database. So the middle tier is being used by the client application.
And this is a very common architecture for Visual Basic 6 applications, and so Ed's going to show us how such a common application can be upgraded.
So when you've got a multi-tier application, the order that you should do it, you should upgrade the client first, and then the middle tier, and then any base objects. So you're moving your way up the dependency tree, and this is the simplest way of doing it. So I've just started visualbasic.net, and to upgrade a VB6 application, we go File, Open, Project, navigate to the application, to the VBP file, double click on it, and then the visualbasic.net upgrade wizard starts. Now I use it.
So it's just noticing the fact that you're trying to open up a VB6 application. It says, hey,
Yeah.
you know, I'm not VB6 anymore, I'm VBNet, so I'll take and do the upgrade for
It's
you.
associated, it's associated with that VBP file that starts the wizard up. And you'll notice it asks for a file location because it leaves the VB6 application where it is, and it upgrades to a new visualbasic.net application. So while the wizard is running, I should tell you that you may notice that I've got VB6 and visualbasic.net installed and running on the same machine, and that's actually a recommended configuration, because before upgrading you want to make sure that your application runs in VB6, because if it doesn't run in VB6, the chances are it's not going to run in VB.net.
Right. I think it's important to note that the upgrade wizard is not just simply doing a line-by-line translation of the Visual Basic 6 application. It's actually doing a very deep analysis of the objects and type libraries and code to understand how best to upgrade it. So, for example, moving forms in VB6 to forms in VB.net takes more than just a line-by-line upgrade. It actually has to better understand the objects you're using and what those object models are and so forth. And we've partnered with a company in Costa Rica called Artensoft, and they've worked with us on this technology that's in Visual Studio.net, the upgrade wizard itself. But we've also got a partnership with them where they provide consulting services. Now, the upgrade tool that we've got here in Visual Studio.net upgrades applications and projects just as we're showing here, but we felt that in many cases, companies that have a 2-tier architecture, large applications, that want to move those applications to the world of XML web services might need a little bit more help in making the right architectural decisions. And Artensoft is a company that has that expertise that can provide the consulting services so they can get the code into the .NET platform and also work on the architectural guidance needed to get the right set of things to happen to move large applications into that world.
So it's not just upgrading the application, but actually upgrading the mindset of the application
Exactly.
as well. I'll make sure I include a link to them at the bottom of the transcript and as
great.
well as the other things.
I think it's important to note that there's very little benefit in just moving an application to visualbasic.net and running it the way you developed it before. I mean, with all these great new features, it's like buying a Porsche Carrera and just driving around in first gear. You know, you really want to stretch visualbasic.net and add some of the cool new features.
Now, I expect that you've done a lot of testing with existing VB6 applications through this upgrade application to make sure it works properly. What sort of feedback have you been getting from users about that?
I think in Beta 1, it was quite a new product, and we had quite a few limitations in the tool. The tool could handle only 20 objects, a project with only 20 forms or classes, that sort of thing. In Beta 2, we've done a lot of work. We've improved the performance 2 to 4 times, depending on the size of the project. And I've upgraded a project with 500 forms and 500 classes in it. And it's not an instantaneous process. That took, I think, 3 to 4 hours to upgrade, but it did it. And it's certainly a process that you only have to do once as well. So we've seen quite a lot of advances in Beta 2. In fact, the whole of Visual Basic, I think, has really come of age in Beta 2. Visual Basic is a very rich programming environment, and we've done a lot of work on the IntelliSense and on the editor, on getting COM objects to work, and on getting the upgrade tool to work with everything else as well. So the experience is great in Beta 2.
Okay. Looks like it's finished now.
Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do, like any Visual Basic developer, is press F5 and try and run this. And the VisualBasic.net pops up a dialog here. It's asking where to save a solution file. So all projects in VisualBasic.net are associated with a solution file, which is kind of like a VBG group file in VB6. So we've got some build errors, so let's have a look at those. So here we're seeing the task list, and the task list is showing us all the compile errors here. If I right mouse click on the task list and show all the tasks, we can also see upgrade warnings that have been put into the code. So when you start seeing upgrade warnings and compile errors, the first thing you should do is have a look at this upgrade report. The upgrade report is being added to your VisualBasic.net project, and it lists all of the issues and problems and warnings that are going on with your project. It's a way of seeing at a glance what the issues are. So if I open that Weexpando tag there, I can see that in this command check click subroutine, there's a problem with some of the controls. If I click on that link there, it takes me to online help. So we identify problems, we put errors in code, we put warnings in code, we also generate an upgrade report, and these are all linked to online help. And the online help tells you how to fix the problem. So in this case here, it's warning me that I've used a form where I should be using a more specific instance of a form. So let's double click on that task list item, and you can see the problem here. One of the neat things I hope everyone at home can see this, one of the neat things with the compiler is that it's continually running in the background, and it detects when there's compile errors, and it puts these blue squigglies underneath that people will probably recognize from Microsoft Word as errors. So if I follow the advice of the help and change this to be a more strongly typed form, then the errors go away.
So what exactly did you do there?
So what I did is I changed the generic form, system.windows.forms.form, to the more specific form checkout, which is the form that I'm actually accessing here. Now, the reason why the problem happened is VB6 is quite loose with type checking, so it allows you to declare an object of type form and then use controls from that as though they were properties. In VisualBasic.net, the form object doesn't have those controls as properties, so it will create an error. So what you've got to do is you've either got to late bind that variable, or you've got to declare it as a more specific type. It's all about strong type checking, which VB6.
So in your original VB6 code, this would have been dim form as form.
That's correct.
And then the upgrade wizard converted the term form to system.windows.form.form.
Yeah.
And that wasn't quite good enough. So you, as an intelligent person who knew the code, knew what you really wanted to do, had to come in and actually kind of fill in the blank.
Exactly.
That's
and the
correct.
help that Ed just linked to gave a little bit of descriptive text that essentially said what you just said, which is you had this more generic form and you really need to do this, and since you wrote the program, you would know exactly what you need to go in and do.
And you may ask the question, why couldn't the upgrade tool have handled this for me? And it's because it needed some human intelligence in here. It can't do everything, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
So what I do as well whenever I'm upgrading is, now that I've fixed this problem, I remove these upgrade warnings, and these disappear from the task list. So the process of developing is to just keep fixing the errors, and they disappear from the task list, and gradually you get down to 0. Here's another problem that we've got. Notice I clicked on the item in the task list and it jumped to the place in code. So I've got some sort of late binding default property. Now let's have a look at this one here. The problem here is that I've declared one of my variables as being as being an object, or a variant in VB6, which becomes an object in VB.NET. And the upgrade tool couldn't determine whether it needed to resolve default properties of that or not. So it just spat a warning into code just to warn me about that. So the way to solve these late binding problems is to identify the variable where it's happening, go to the definition of that variable, and change it to the right type. So in this case here, I'm going to change that to string. Now this is a fairly simple example, and that's the only thing I have to do. But let's suppose that was a form or a record set or a more complex object. There are some cases where now I'd see some more compile errors where it recognised that we need to resolve the default properties. So in that case, you'd go through and you'd resolve those default properties and just get everything working. So the final error I've got here is a difference in behaviour. This warning says, the upgrade warning, the application will terminate when submain finishes. So this is a difference between VB6 and Visual Basic.NET. In VB6, if your startup object is submain, then and that creates some forms or other sort of classes, objects from submain, the application will not finish until all of those objects have been destroyed from memory. In Visual Basic.NET, the application terminates after submain has finished, and this is sort of this is all about, because Visual Basic.NET is a multi-threaded language. You know, we have to have some way of determining when to finish the application. So what we're going to do, if we look in this help, it'll give us some. It gives us some help in telling us how to do it, and it suggests that we can choose a startup form instead of submain. But there's also another option as well, and that is simply to change the way we open that startup form, and I'm going to do that. What I'm doing here, I actually find it quite tricky to talk while I'm typing, so I'll just type and then I'll tell you what I'm doing. What I'm doing here is I'm using a new feature of Visual Basic.NET, which we can run instances of forms or run instances of classes, and it basically creates a sort of I'm not sure if it's a new process, but it allows us to run this and not finish when submain finishes. So I've got one more thing to look at here, and it says review the values of the assembly attributes. So this is just a recommendation. It says the upgrade tool is saying, hey, we've created these sort of default settings for your application. You may want to review them and change them to make them more personalized.
And the assembly is something new to the .NET application model, where VB6 didn't have something like an assembly before.
It is new, but it's not something to be scared of either. Just to drill into this just a little bit, in Visual Basic 6, we compiled XEs and DLLs, and in Visual Basic.NET, we also compile XEs and DLLs. But these XEs and DLLs are subtly different. They contain all the code like they did in VB6, but they also contain sort of settings that we use to store in the registry. So there's metadata in there which fully describes what the XE or DLL does. And that sort of code plus the metadata is called an assembly. So let's run this, shall we, and see what happens now that we've got rid of all the errors. Now, I've got to stress that this is just only a few errors here, and with a big application, you're going to see, as we were talking about before, it takes sort of 5% of the modifications, 5% of the time to develop the app to make the modifications. So there's quite a few things that can happen, but we're working really hard to identify all of them, putting them into help, putting them to knowledge base articles. So really it's going to be quite a simple or straightforward job anyway to upgrade applications.
And the fact that 95% of your code in your application moves over and upgrades just fine is actually, I think, really, really great, because that 5%, while it might require some work, it's nothing compared to creating the entire application, and then you can start using the benefits of the new platform.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're just running this again, and if we run the VB6 version side by side, you can see, this is the VB6 version running here, this is the VB.NET version. You can see they look practically identical. The forms are the same size, everything looks the same. There's a few minor differences. If you look in the top left-hand corner, the default icon for a form is slightly different than the default icon. And when we designed the upgrade tool, we thought, well, we could fix that, but we thought we'd leave that one in just to, it helps to actually know what you're doing. So if we go to the checkout and we do that pay for credit card again, let's just drill into here for a second. Do you remember the error that we saw before because I hadn't finished that code? And you remember in VB6 when if you have an unhandled error, your application crashes quite nastily. Well, in Visual Basic.NET, we've actually got a way to implement a global error handler, and I'm going to show you how to do that right now.
This is another one of those features that our customers have been asking us for a long, long time, and I think they'll be quite pleased to see it.
So I'm going to my submain here, which is my startup object, and I'm going to use this new thing called structured exception handling, and I usually refer to it as try-catch. So if I go try, then put a catch in here, then an end try. So in my catch statement, basically what's going to happen here is going to try to do the thing it's doing, which is opening the main form, and then if it fails, it goes to the catch, and I go catch EX as exception, and then after this I'm just going to show in a message box, oops, what the exception is. Message box, oops, something happened. So the exception is a new object in Visual Basic.NET, and the exception capture, it's like the old error object, which still exists, the error object, but the exception gives you a much richer access to what happens. So let's run this application now with this new global error handler in it. So again, Rob Copeland is going to take out the Visual Basic.NET books. You never succeed in taking them out, do you? We always crash. So now when we go pay with credit card, it pops up this message box here and says, oops, something has happened. And I can do other things in that catch statement, like I could fire up the form again, or I can do some other behavior. So it's really quite a very simple way to create a global error handler. But let's look at some other things now that I've got this thing upgraded. So a lot of people hated writing resize code in VB6. I never hated it because I never wrote it because it was so hard to do. But just briefly, resize code is so that when you resize the form, all your controls resize as well. And it really helps if people have different screen sizes and resolutions and stuff.
Well, the way you get around that is just don't make your forms resizable.
That's right. That's right.
So what we're going to do is we're going to make this an easily resizable form. I'm going to select all of these controls at the bottom, these buttons here, and I'm going to anchor them to the bottom right-hand side of the form.
Okay, so what are you doing? You're clicking on a little thing there.
In the property grid, I'm clicking on the anchor property, and I'm visually choosing where I want it to be anchored
So
to.
where you got the dark squares sitting, that says use those deltas between the frame edge and maintain those at all times, regardless of what happens elsewhere.
Yep. So that the top left-hand bits can move, but the bottom right-hand bits have to maintain that sort of distance away from the edge of the form. So if we look at this this big, by the way, this is an ActiveX control here, and ActiveX controls just work just great in Visual Basic.
Okay, on that one, since you took and set all sides, top, bottom, left, right, to be anchored, that means the form is actually going to grow in size and not move around.
The easiest way to learn about anchoring is actually to try it. Because conceptually you have to try and, conceptually you're thinking, well, how does that work? How does that anchor? But as soon as you try doing it, it feels very, very natural. So this button here, I want this to move with the right-hand edge of the form. So I anchor it to the right hand. And finally, this text box here, I'm going to anchor it to the top left and right-hand side. So it'll expand with the form. So if I run that, we'll see exactly what it does. So now when I grab the bottom edge of this form and resize it, you notice that all the controls resize with it. So I think that's a pretty cool feature of Visual Basic.net. So let's do one other thing, one other really... Now this is, what I'm going to show you here is not actually a, I guess it's not really a, it's not strictly a useful thing, but it's kind of fun. And that's really, you know, one of the reasons why we program, isn't it? Because it's sort of fun. I'm going to make a semi-transparent form, and I'm going to do it very, very easily. Of this lookup customer form, I'm going to change its opacity to 0.5 in the form load. Press F5, and this one line here, and we'll be drilling into some more of these quite cool things later on, but this one line here means that when I open that form, can everyone see that? It's actually semi-transparent, but it works just the way it did before, but you can see through it.
You got a ghost on there.
That's one of those kind of fun things that's in Visual Basic.net, and there's a lot of those little fun things as well. And
kind of reminds me of blink tags and marquees and animated GIFs and web pages. We're probably going to see tons of applications now coming up with opacity being set on their applications.
So let's just review what we've done here. We've upgraded our Visual Basic 6 client into Visual Basic.net. We've fixed the errors that we've made the modifications that we had to make, and then we sort of added value, what I call add value with some of the cool new features of Visual Basic.net.
And decreased value by adding opacity.
Yes. So this client application is still talking to the old VB6 middle tier, which is a DLL. So let's look at upgrading that DLL as well into Visual Basic.net. So the upgrade wizard only upgrades projects. So if you want to upgrade a project group, the idea is to upgrade the client first and then add the middle tier and the other objects into the new Visual Basic.net solution. So if I go File, Add Project, Existing Project, and I'm going to navigate to the middle tier, VBP, accept all defaults of the wizard. By the way, I always accept all the defaults of the wizard. We used to have a lot more options, but we pulled them out, and so it's just accept the defaults and let it run through. So what we're doing here is we're upgrading that business logic, that middle tier business object of our application.
Now this seemed to work a little bit faster. Is that just because there's no forms and stuff involved into it, and so the wizard had to take and work a little bit harder on the forms?
Exactly. But when I was talking a little bit earlier about the analysis that has to happen in all of the type libraries and controls, each of those controls has its own type library, and the form has a large type library, and so that can take quite a bit of time. But here we've just got a business object with a couple of components that it's using, so it's quite a bit faster.
So this middle tier has been upgraded, the class has been upgraded to a Visual Basic.net class. So for the client to use that middle tier, what I've got to do is go into the references of the client, remove its reference to the old Visual Basic 6 client, and then add a project-to-project reference to that middle tier. And now that I've done that, I've got the client and the middle tier upgraded to Visual Basic.net, and when we press F5, everything is running as a Visual Basic.net application. And again, this looks exactly like its VB6 counterpart, well, except for that transparency. and yeah, it works great.
Cool. I mean, I think that's pretty exciting, showing how easy it is. I mean, you know, thankfully you didn't pick a project that just transferred over completely. You're sort of actually able to see some of the problems come up on that. Now, I expect that in dealing with other projects that users are doing out there, they'll have the similar sort of problems. Some of them might even have more problems than we saw here. Some of them might have projects that convert over without any errors at all.
Sure. So Robert, kind of the thing that I'd advise people at home is first of all, get Beta 2. Beta 2 is a great product, and we want to hear about your experiences with Beta 2 as well. The second thing is, before you even upgrade your first application, spend a few days just getting to know Visual Basic.net, getting to know some of the new concepts. And this really means that when you're upgrading, you're not thinking of things in terms of VB6, but you're thinking of them in terms of Visual Basic.net. Your eyes are open to the new sort of possibilities. And so after that, when you're ready to upgrade, then pick a small project. Don't pick a 100 or 200 form application, because remember I was talking about that 5% of modifications? Well, if you've got like a project that took a year to write, then it's going to take you sort of 3 or 4 weeks just to make those modifications to get it running. So choose something small so you have success quicker, and a small app is a lot of fun. You're learning the same concepts, you're learning about getting things going, and you're looking at the new features of VB.NET.
Now, I suppose when you're talking about a program that you spent a year writing, a year of your life developing an application in VB6, you've got to have some emotional commitment to that application almost, and to VB6 itself. What sort of problems do you see people having in just conceptualizing moving over to VB.NET?
Well, I think what you just said makes a lot of sense. People get an emotional attachment to their code, and they should. They spend a lot of time with it, and they spend a lot of time on it and making it right. And we've been showing and talking about how you upgrade to Visual Basic.NET, and talked about some of the changes to Visual Basic.NET. And I think that sometimes an initial reaction to change is one of a little bit of concern, because change means that what you've known in the past is now different and is now changed, and you're going to have to spend some time learning the new instead of knowing the old. As I said before, our main design goal with Visual Basic.NET was to make it very, very familiar and easy for Visual Basic developers to just get right into it and feel comfortable and be productive immediately, and we've succeeded with that goal. So I think the initial reaction for some people might be, well, gosh, you've made some changes, but in reality it's still Visual Basic, and it's a great place to be.
Can I show you some more things with this upgraded app?
Sure.
Because we're not quite finished yet.
Okay.
So one of the great new things with Visual Basic.NET is some of the easy web features that are available. And I think a lot of VB developers are probably like me, that we used to shy away from the web, and we never really wanted to use it because we didn't know how to develop for it, and we didn't want to show our ignorance. But in Visual Basic.NET, we make the whole web development experience much, much simpler. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a web forms application, and I want to add a search page. So my video shop, people out on the web, they can search for videos on there and see something that they would like. So
just put that terminology in reference here. What we just got through developing, or working on developing, was a Windows Forms application. Now you're going to be switching to a web form application.
And I'm just going to basically add a search page, so people can search my video shop and find videos that they're interested in.
One of the great things is he's adding a search page to that existing application. So we took a Visual Basic 6 application, upgraded it to Visual Basic.NET, and now we're going to add web capabilities to that application. Yeah,
your VB6 application really is the foundation of your Visual Basic.NET development experience. Anyway, enough talk. Let's demo. So if we go Add Project, and I'm going to add a new project here, and this is an ASP.NET web application. And before I do anything with my web application, I'm just going to go into my business object, and I'm going to make some changes to it so you can pass back to a web application a data set. And a data set is a new concept in Visual Basic.NET. It's part of ADO.NET, and it's a more object-oriented way and it's a disconnected object-oriented way of passing data backwards and forwards. It's disconnected data objects. It's kind of the next evolution of Visual Basic.NET. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a function now that extends my middle tier and returns a data set back to my web application or whatever application I want to use it. So let's just drill into the business object that I have here already. I have a method called getVideos. And what you do is you pass through a title. It's kind of like a search thing. So you pass through a title, and it searches for anything, for all those videos, and it passes back an XML string, which can be serialized backwards and forwards into a record set. So I'm going to create a new function here, and we're going to call this getVideos dataset. And again, we're going to accept the title, and we're going to return a data set. So the first thing that this thing does first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a record set, dim rs as ADODB.record set. And we're going to assign that record set to the result of this method that we already have in place. And we're going to pass through the search string. Now in actual fact this thing is returning back a string, so we have to serialize this back to our record set. And I've got a function that I've written which serializes record sets to strings and strings to record set. It could be, I'd like to put this on our notes as well because I think it'll be handy for people to have. So now we've got this, now we've got all these videos, this video list into a record set. What we're going to do is we're going to put this into a data set. So we're going to create an OLADB data adapter. And we're going to create a data table. And Rob might want to tell you, just while I'm typing this, what a data table is in a data set.
Well, as Ed was talking a little bit ago, a data set is a disconnected set of data that's actually represented as XML as you pass it from machine to machine. And the data table is a table inside of that XML, so it's an object that represents a set of data inside of the data set. A data set can contain multiple tables with relationships and so forth, and that whole thing can be represented as XML.
So what I'm doing here is I'm using the OLAD data adapter to fill my data table with the results of that record set. So this is, conceptually, this is taking an ADO record set and turning it into an ADO.net data table, which is part of a data set. And then I'm going to add that data table to the data set. A data set can have many data tables. And then we return that data set. This is an interesting, we've changed the meaning of return statement. Return in VB6 used to be go sub return, and now in Visual Basic.net it's just a simple way of returning a value from a function. So if we go back, let's just close that middle tier now. If you remember, we put that code in that middle tier. Now let's have a look at our web application. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a reference to that middle tier. And now let's have a look at the fun part. And the fun part for me is always designing the form. What we have in front of us is a canvas or a surface, and we're going to design our web page on this surface. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add an image on here. We're going to put our video store image on. And I'm going down to the properties here, and I'm choosing the URL for that image. The URL for that image.
So this image is actually coming across the web.
Yeah. This image you can log into this from your home PC if you want to search my video store, and you'll see this image and you'll see everything. See, Visual Basic.net handles all of that for you. It'll put it in the right place, deploy it. We really have made web development so easy. I'm going to put a text box on here, which is conceptually the same as just your familiar text box, and a button. I'm actually also going to change the background color of this web form to grey, because I like grey. And our button is going to be called search. And we're going to put a grid on here as well. This toolbox, by the way, this is the web forms toolbox rather than a Windows Forms toolbox. So these are all familiar looking controls, but they're specifically designed for web forms. We're also going to auto format this and give it a more professional sort of appearance. So what I've got here, what I've just as I was talking, you've seen that I've built up. Perhaps it's not very complicated, but it's kind of, it's the foundation. It's a fairly normal looking sort of web form. And I did it as simply as you develop a Windows application. So let's double click on that search button and put some code behind it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an instance of my middle tier class and then pull a data set back from that and put that into that data grid that I put on that form. So dim C is new. That's the business object. And if I go me dot data grid 1, now what I do is I set the data source of that grid, and I set it to the get videos data set. And what I pass through to that method is I pass through the contents of that text box, which is a search string.
So that get video data set, that's the call that's going out to the server, doing the search, and returning back this XML blob. But you're not dealing with an XML blob, you're dealing with it as a native data set object.
Right.
Yep.
And it appears as an object with methods and events and properties. Something familiar.
And we're almost there. And then I do a data bind. Now that binds it. So, I've got to do one more thing. You notice over on the right-hand side, client is the is in a heavy bold type. That's the startup project. And I've got to change my web application to be the startup project. Now when we press F5, you notice you can run a web application just exactly the same way as you run any other application in Visual Basic.NET by pressing F5. It starts up Internet Explorer. Basically what it's doing is it's compiling that web application, it's sending it to the server, which in this case is just my machine, and then it's connecting to that server with Internet Explorer. And now I've got my web page here, and I can search my video store and bring back the results and display them in a grid.
Wow.
And it's as simple as that.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
That's something new for VB programmers.
Yep. And it really shows how you can mix your existing applications with, take them to VB.NET and then expand them using the great new capabilities.
Yeah. I mean, I think this shows a lot of opportunities for VB programmers to kind of, branch out and do more things. I mean, they always looked at the web as, okay, it's VB script or JavaScript, a lesser language, but now they can use VB for developing those great solutions that live on the web.
It's all about integration, it's all about connectivity. We integrate with other languages, we're integrating with the platform, and we're also giving you that ability to connect to the web, to connect to your Windows, to connect to things written in other platforms. Can I show you one more thing? Just one.
Sure. We got a couple seconds, I think.
Okay, this is one of my favorite demos, and I don't have to write a line of code, which is good. Basically, I want to show you, the web stuff's cool, but really, personally,
He's getting pretty excited here.
Personally, I'm a Windows programmer, so the Windows programming stuff actually makes me the most excited.
Well, and we were talking a little bit ago about all the great new features that we have in our new Windows Forms package.
So I've got something for the folks back home. If you've got Beta 2 sitting on your computer at the moment, and you've seen that opacity effect that we were showing before, I'll show you some of the other really neat effects that you can do in Windows Forms, and I'm going to show you the code that you need to use just to do it as well. First of all, this is a Windows Forms application. First of all, if I click this button, it makes it opaque. So we've got a semi-transparent form, and you can choose the level of opacity. So it can be 0.9 for something that's mostly not see-through, or 0.1 for a very see-through one. The other thing I can do with 2 lines of code is I can change the layout of the form. I can change the color and the font, and all of the controls inherit from that. So inheritance is really baked right into the language now. So they inherit from it, and they will change as well.
So it's kind of like in the web world, kind of like cascading style sheets to a certain
Exactly.
extent.
Yeah. The other thing I can do is I can finally create a donut form in Visual Basic.NET.
Now you're going overboard, I think.
And this is a real donut form. Like if I pull this donut form, I can actually click in the middle, and you can select icons throughout and stuff like that. So I challenge anyone to find a real use for this. The other thing, which is really quite neat as well, is I can create a gradient. So what we're doing here, to create this gradient, we create a brush, which is a gradient brush, and then we paint the background of the form with that brush. The other thing I can do is I can do text effects. So here I'm painting the VB.NET onto my form, and I'm changing the color. And I can paint it with a bitmap too. I can paint text with a bitmap, and I can rotate that as well. So there's really a lot of things that you can do. And of course, as you would expect, I can do a lot of things at once. So I can change the layout, change the region, change the gradient, and then I can fade that in. So that's something which is really quite neat, and that's something which is all available with Visual Basic.net. Okay, so I hope we've shown enough here for people to get excited about Visual Basic.net, and really my key thing with the upgrading is it's definitely possible, and what you need to do is you need to run your applications through the upgrade tool. You need to fix them. You need to make modifications to fix the errors, and then you really want to start adding value with some of the great new features of Visual Basic.net.
Like making a donut-shaped window.
Exactly.
I wonder how many donut-shaped windows we're going to start seeing now.
Now, is this sample code in VB.net? Is one of the samples they include in the SDK?
I don't think it is, but we can provide it. We can provide it as an attachment to the show.
Okay, probably what I'll do is I'll check with MSDN's got this great code center where people can download sample code that people have written.
Yeah.
I'll get it installed in there and have a link to it in the bottom of the show where you can get that at.
Great.
Okay. So, Rob, do you have any closing words you want to impart upon our audience before we take off here?
Other than what I've already said about the great new features and the benefits and people actually downloading Beta 2, I think those are the main points that I wanted to make. We've got a great product, and we're very, very excited to have people start looking at it and using it.
Yeah, we saw Ed's pretty excited about it, so he's one of the programmers out there.
Yes.
Yep. Any closing words, Ed?
No, just that I just got to say that we're really proud of Beta 2, and we're marching on to get this product finished and in people's hands, and I just hope everyone loves it as much as we do at Microsoft.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
Well, hopefully you learned a little bit about how VB.net can help you in developing your applications, as well as learning how VB6 upgrade to VB.net is actually fairly painless. So install Beta 2 of the .NET framework and Visual Studio.net. Try it out yourself. Try writing some applications using donuts and opacity and other cool features like that, and hopefully we'll see your applications out there real soon now. So thanks for joining us.
We talk so much about .NET technologies on this show. Well, with me today is Chris Dangler. He is a software design engineer with the .NET Platform Strategy Group.
That's right.
Chris, welcome.
Thanks.
So tell me about what you do. What is it about to be a part of that group?
Our team, currently we build prototypes and demos for the evangelists that go out and talk about .NET strategies and Windows XP. Difference between prototypes and demos, prototypes being actual samples of technologies and programs that we write that use the existing or what we're using in beta code to exemplify what we're trying to show. Demos being more, we kind of use the code to say what if type scenarios.
Can you talk about some of the specific projects you're working on in your group?
Well, the most recent things that we did were some demos and prototypes using Hailstorm and Passport technologies to show how some scenarios might work using these technologies in different industry segments, such as manufacturing, retail, and media type scenarios.
What do you say, what would you find is most challenging for you working on .NET technologies?
Some of the most challenging things are, since a lot of this is just coming to fruition now, trying to use the existing stuff to come up with these what-if type scenarios. Some of these scenarios haven't been thought of or haven't been developed yet. So when we try to piece together these situations for new industries, it's a totally new area that a lot of groups haven't experienced yet and haven't experimented with. And so trying to use these technologies and trying to think through the situation, say what in these industries might be a really something that's really going to grab you and say, yeah, wow, this is something really interesting that nobody's seen before. And by the time the real reward in it is when you actually look at the finished product and say, geez, you really created something really incredible here, and the industry see that as well.
Yeah, it's one thing to hear about what .NET can do, but actually see an example, it's a lot more effective.
And it's really incredible to be back in the back end kind of looking at that going, yeah, I did part of that there.
It's very great. And what do you think is the greatest, to you, what's the greatest potential of .NET? Or what's something you'd like to see in the future that .NET technologies would be a part of?
One of the biggest enjoyments I get out of the .NET idea is the whole thing behind web services. Web services is just a really exciting area, especially since I had early on worked on the original Microsoft SOAP toolkit, which was the MSDN sample called the Microsoft SOAP Toolkit version 1. There's a newer version of Microsoft SOAP Toolkit version 2 now, but we were pioneering an area that hadn't been looked at all that much at the time, and what originally started out to be a Microsoft Developer Network sample turned into a lot more, and we started looking into some different ways that we could use this technology. And I don't think at the time that Robert Coleridge and I worked on the project that we really realized we kind of realized what we were looking at, but we didn't understand the full potential here. And when we started digging into it a little bit further, we kind of went, wow, this is, and kind of sitting back, thinking back now, looking at that time, and looking where it's come to now with the .NET framework and web services and stuff, we were sitting back thinking, we wanted to explode and tell people, geez, you got to see this. I remember mentioning it to my wife a few times, and she would look at me and say, well, that's really neat, honey. But she, talking to other developers, and I would explain it to them, and they would kind of look at me and say, are you serious? Is this, is this something that's coming up? And I'm like, yeah, this is huge, huge. So that was really exciting.
That's great. So before this group, you did samples for MSDN.
Yeah, I worked on the MSDN team, and I actually worked on a lot of samples, demos, and things for conferences. We had done a Comdex demo, and that's when we started getting into the SOAP stuff, because our boss at the time wanted some of these samples to prove these types of scenarios. I mean, he had the thinking, going ahead thinking, wow, this is something big, and we weren't really hip to it yet, but growing with him, we kind of learned, what was coming up, and then we kind of got really addicted to it.
Yeah. So what kind of things did you do before Microsoft? Have you always worked in the technical industry or always worked on computers?
When I was a little kid, my dad had actually purchased for us an old Apple II, an Apple II Plus, and I was probably 11 years old. My brother was 9, and he and I developed quite a bit on it. We started getting really addicted to it as well. And we ended up building a job costing system for his furniture manufacturing corporation in South San Francisco. And what was really interesting at the time, I was a little kid imagining, this is really easy stuff here. And he said, but you have no idea, this is really important for me to get this done. As I grew up and went through high school and college, I kind of stuck with it a little bit, but graduated with a degree in accounting and became a disc jockey in a nightclub in Sacramento. And at the time, my brother was working for Microsoft, and he said, you've got to come up here. You've got to come up to Washington. Of course, moving from California to Washington, especially with your whole family, that was a big deal. Yeah. And I said, I'll come and check it out. And by the time I got up here, I guess I hadn't realized where my skill level was at, was a lot higher than I had known. And within 20 minutes of being up here, I had a position up here. And I was just sucked in ever since. Yeah. And I've been, originally I was contracting for Microsoft for 3 or 4 years, and then after that, just came on full-time in October, just having a blast since.
That's great. So what was it like working as a disc jockey?
Ooh, that's a job all in itself. That was an interesting position. It was a lot of hours, a lot of craziness. But a lot of good memories as well. Yeah. But something I'll never go back to.
Do you have
again.
any particular good stories you could tell?
Not on camera.
Okay. So what type of things do you do outside of work? What hobbies do you have?
Well, the funny thing is outside hobbies, my outside hobbies include computers. Yeah. So I mean, it's kind of like you kind of once it's in your blood, I guess you're there forever. I developed with a friend of mine, Steve Hawes. We developed the world's first internet request-based radio station called Los Dudes. And at the time, because we had been disc jockeys and he came out here as a developer as well, we thought, wow, this is something really cool. Let's build a radio station. I thought, that's dumb. No, I mean, there's a lot of radio stations, but we started digging in a little bit more. And at the time, I was learning SOAP and XML and web services and stuff, and so I, of course, made the whole web service out of the radio station. And it grew so fast that now it's a little bit out of control, and I've had to push a lot of that off on him because he's got more time for it. But
do you ever provide some of the voices? Do you do DJing for?
Yeah, there's a lot of live stuff on there. Most of my voice is pre-recorded on there, but Steve he goes live because the machines are over in his control. But it's a lot of fun, but wow, what a lot of time, a lot more time than I thought it was going to be.
So the URL is losdudes.com?
Losdudes.com.
That's great.
Yeah.
So everyone should check it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you get the capacity.
When we get the capacity. We're so overloaded as it is, but it's a lot of fun.
That's great. So what do you like best about your job?
That's actually kind of easy to answer. The most fun times that I have at work is when we're actually experimenting with new technologies that people haven't touched yet, and I can see the potential of a lot of them, and thinking to myself, while I'm working on these technologies, I know a month, 3 months, 6 months, whatever the time frame is, that there's going to be thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of developers starting to adopt these technologies for the first time. And I sit back and kind of think to myself, yeah, I remember that time too. I remember when I had to sit back and try to figure this stuff out. But some of the pitfalls coming with those new technologies is that you're working with a lot of beta code, not just the beta technology, but the beta platform on which it's riding on, the beta tools to program them with, and then areas that people hadn't really even experienced yet. You come across some ideas that the teams may not have thought of yet, and you get to contribute those ideas. And when you come back to the teams and say, this technology is really incredible, but wouldn't it be neat if you could add just this piece in? And sometimes they'll look at you and, maybe that's not such a good idea. And other times they go, hey, wait a minute, you might be onto something here. And then, which was somewhat of the case of the SOAP Toolkit 1, some of the ideas, from what I understand, were adopted into both the SOAP Toolkit 2 and some of the .NET platform stuff for web services and stuff. I mean, that's huge. That's a huge thing.
Yeah.
And to think, back 6, 8 months ago, year ago, whatever it was, that we were thinking about these scenarios, and I don't think we really realized, like I said before, what we were sitting on at the time would actually come to such a powerful fruition at the least. So I mean, that's probably the most exciting thing about it.
It's usually how great ideas get started.
Oh yeah.
Don't realize the potential.
Not at all. Not at all.
Well, Chris, thanks for joining me today. It's been great talking to you.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks for joining us for another episode of the .NET Show. Hopefully you learned some things about VB.NET that'll make your programming that much more productive.
And stay tuned for the next episode where we talk about, what is the next episode about?
I don't know. I haven't decided yet.
Uh-oh.
Well, this would be a good chance for the audience to help participate. Go out and use the comments section attached to the page you started this from and let us know what you think the next episode of the .NET Show would be. So stay tuned, and maybe your suggestions what we'll use. Until then, we'll see you on the web.